It is another busy night of people, power, and politics. Thank you, my friends, for staying up with us tonight. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. You know, today's a perfect example of the news cycle. It's like drinking from a fire hose. So stay with us because we have a lot to get to, including this. The University of Michigan ends its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the wake of new guidance from the Trump administration. We're actually getting some perspective from a woman you know well, former state representative and educator Sherry Gade-Ignago. Plus, we're talking tariffs like the whole world is at this hour after President Trump slaps on those 25% taxes on auto imports. It affects us here at home more than anywhere else. We're talking with a financial advisor and auto industry analyst about what this means for both automakers and your pocketbook, especially if you want to buy a new car. And those tariffs are where we begin tonight, because while the president says it'll boost manufacturing here in the United States, experts say it could also pinch automakers who depend on global supply chain. Now, the White House expects to raise $100 billion every year because of this. Well, we told you yesterday that's complicated, and here's why. U.S. automakers get parts from all over the world, Mexico, Canada, you name it. Foreign leaders are criticizing this latest tariff, seeing it as escalating the trade war that's already well underway. The European Union says it's considering retaliatory tariffs at this hour, but they hope it doesn't come to that.
I want to emphasize once again that our priority here is to find a negotiated solution. A solution that works for both sides, for the EU and US, a solution that strengthens our trade and economic relationship, which is by any distance the most valuable and important in the world.
The US is kind of cutting itself off from the rest of the world. The US car makers tend to focus on big gas-guzzling pickups, which places like Europe, where petrol, gasoline is expensive, don't want to buy. So this is just going to isolate, I think, US producers even further.
All right, what does this all mean? We'll look at the big board for this one. Yesterday, the impending announcement saw two of the big three stock go down, and today, all three dropped even more. Take a look. Ford saw a decline of nearly 4%. General Motors, as you see here, with the sharpest drop, more than 7%. And Stellantis had the best day of the three, but they were down a little more than 1% as well. You know, the man federal officials say is the leader of the MS-13 gang on the East Coast is now behind bars. That's a group known for brutal violence and extortion. Attorney General Pam Bondi says Henry Santos was arrested in North Virginia on an immigration warrant. Bondi says he was living here illegally and now faces illegal gun possession charges as well. Take a listen.
To the FBI, we got one of the worst of MS-13 off the streets this morning. Virginia and the country is a lot safer today.
For those countries who push back on taking their criminal nationals back, we'll send them to another country.
MS-13 started as a street gang in Los Angeles, but guess what? It actually grew into that transnational gang based in El Salvador that has so much of the political world here in America talking. And speaking of the Attorney General, she said a DOJ investigation into Signalgate isn't going to happen. We're talking about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing those attack plans against the Houthis in Yemen, shared on that messaging app known as Signal. It was on a group chat that included a reporter from The Atlantic. Those texts, including a timeline of the strike, included where the target was expected to be and when planes would actually launch. Bondi said nothing classified was actually shared in that string, but Democrats say this really could have put service members in harm's way.
First, it was sensitive information, not classified, and inadvertently released. And what we should be talking about is it was a very successful mission.
Everyone else in the Pentagon would say, I screwed up royally. I'm going to learn from this. We're going to do an investigation. I'm going to apologize, and we're going to move on. That's what I'm waiting to hear from the Secretary of Defense.
It's interesting. It's the difference between sensitive information and classified information. People are using that interchangeably, but that's the distinction Bondi is making. Democrats have called for Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz to resign, but President Trump has stood behind them nonetheless. Now to a major story involving the University of Michigan. The school's president, Santa Ono, announcing they will end their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This comes amid pressure from the federal government, which he says made the situation urgent. So here's what we know right now at this hour. The university's Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Office for Health, Equity, and Inclusion, are closed. The offices are done. They're also discontinuing their DEI 2.0 strategic plan. You've heard a lot about that. The university said resources will be shifted instead to student programs, including financial aid, mental health, student life, and ethnic and cultural programs. Ono and several high-ranking officials at U of M sent a letter to the campus community, and many of you may have seen this, but this is what it says in part. These decisions have not been made lightly. We recognize that changes are significant and will be challenging for many of us, especially those whose lives and careers have been enriched by and dedicated to programs that are now pivoting. Interesting word here. It went on to say they're committed to having an environment that supports everybody in the community. It's a story that has so many of you talking at home, and as you know, this show is all about you. We want to know what you think. We want to answer your questions. On our Facebook page, this is what some of you told me. James, thanks for writing in. You said, hey, their entire athletic program should walk away then. We'll see how fast they switch it back up. Frederick says veterans fall under DEI. So while you're pleased about people of color getting axed, you're taking out people who've served their country regardless of skin color. Sam says, good. Let's start focusing on merits and not what people look like. Well, tonight we're getting perspective from a person who's not only a former lawmaker, she's also an educator. And as someone you know well if you watch The Pulse, we're talking about former State Representative Sherry Gay-Degnago, also an educator here in Studio C. It's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
The pleasure is mine, Ruth. Thank you for having me on.
This is such an important topic. I want to first, we'll begin where this university professor left off by saying that other programs that promote ethnic and cultural diversity will still exist, though the entire office, as we know it, closes. What does that mean to you?
It's malarkey, to be perfectly honest, in the words of President Biden. It's malarkey. I had a chance to talk to leaders from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Department. One, Dr. Sellers, Professor Sellers, 38 years at the university, that said this was a farce that started in December. This committee that they pulled together was very limited. They've only met 2 times. They were tasked with basically shutting down DEI. And the question is why did U of M have to take the lead out of all of our universities in the state of Michigan to be the one that says that diversity, equity, inclusion should not be a part of the construct at the university?
We know that dollars have everything to do with everything we're talking about here. And when you talk about companies like Target and Disney and other companies that have also pulled back on DEI initiatives, the reason they did it is, simply put, they want to curry the favor of this administration to get the benefits of this administration. If this university is fearful of cuts because of that, is that a good reason?
No, it's not, because that's not. It's political. It's political because many of the regions saw that just like Columbia University, it's about the protests. And so we got to be honest about the politics that we're dealing with right now. Pro-Israel versus First Amendment rights, people's ability to protest and lift their voices against injustice. And that's what this is. We resemble Columbia University at this point, from my perspective, with respect to the University of Michigan. And they're not saying that when it comes to the first draft pick that they're getting, many of which are oftentimes African American. But let's be clear, DEI does not just benefit African Americans. As your callers have stated, and those who have responded on social media, that you have our veterans that have been impacted. We have those who have accessibility rights that need to be addressed. And it's not just about enrollment, it's procurement, the money that is made by businesses that do business with the university. So this is a bunch of gamery. I'm very disappointed that the regions have taken this position, and I look to hear from some of them on lifting up an alternative voice.
Well, we are going to make sure that we ask all of those folks that you're speaking of to come on this program and talk about it. But in the meantime, I do have to ask you about one of the things that they talked about. In mentioning and in announcing this, they said, hey, we want to base things on merit, and we also want to make sure that we have programs in place to help people based on their financial situation. Isn't that the starting point for all of this, or no?
That's just some talking points that they've dreamed up and really are not accurate. When you think about the 40% increase of students that this department, Dr. Rob Sellers, Dr. Pat Coleman Burns, were able to move the needle, and those that work with them, 46% with Pell Grants, 32% with Pell Grants for even undergraduate. So that's not accurate. And so it's, to me, it's political. We know it's political. The numbers don't align, Roop.
Let's say, for whatever reason, that that's not what they say, but instead let's have the conversation about whether or not it should be based on 2 things: financial insecurity and merit. Why doesn't that work in your mind, in general?
Financial insecurity, certainly, but who is going to head those offices? Why couldn't they pivot and not just fire people out of these departments? Why couldn't they realign what their agenda was with the people who are doing this work, many of which are impacted by financial instability? Why didn't they not work with the folks that are leading these efforts, many of which there's crossover with these 2 populations that you're listening? Actually, the The dynamics are right there where they're conjoined. And so why not work with this department? It was political in nature. And so until we're really willing to confront politics of the day, I don't see
How do you do that?
Be honest. Be honest and say that Israel has a problem with the Middle Eastern community lifting their voices. And so just like Columbia University, now University of Michigan, taking the lead when this have not been completely advanced even out of the Trump administration.
As a leader in this community, as someone who believes so passionately about DEI, what do you do in terms of making your voice heard outside of this television program?
Well, what you do is you work with people who you align with. You work with your state legislators, and you hold those accountable. I had a constituent reach out to me in grave disappointment of one of our state senators that was just recently elected, that when she was campaigning, she said one thing, but now that she's in office, when she's voting with Trump, she says, well, my community, I have to represent Trump and I have to represent the Democratic folks. Well, you have to represent everyone, but we don't expect you to change your principles. And so that's what we have to do as voters, as constituents in our communities, is pay attention, number one, to how people are voting, what their statements and their actions say, and hold them accountable, and get involved with organizations and agencies that do this work.
I know that you say that it is all political, and I don't know that anyone would argue with you because of the fact that so many federal dollars matter to universities across this country. But I want to say thanks for starting the conversation here. Sherry Gedegnaga, always good to see you.
Thank you. And we have to understand that this is not just about African Americans. There are so many people that are impacted by DEI. We're number 6 when you think about DEI efforts in this country.
And we mentioned, as you said, veterans as well, who come in all colors as well. Look, this is a conversation we're going to continue not only this week, but continuing next week with some people who also support this particular decision. We're going to be talking to them throughout the week. Thanks for your time here, Sherry.
Thank you.
Up next, a story impacting a major industry, of course, in our state. The tariffs on auto imports. An industry analyst and a financial advisor with how it'll hurt or help you. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. This next one affects all 3 of those. We're talking about the latest tariffs the president is putting into place. Former auto supplier executive and analyst Jan Griffiths joins us, and Dan Casey, a financial advisor with Bridge River Advisors, talks about people's money every single day. And so we thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Let's begin with you, Jan. When you hear about this president saying that essentially we're talking about $100 billion worth of benefit every single year that these tariffs will produce, do you believe that that will happen?
No, absolutely not. There's no way that that benefit, we'll see that benefit in terms of those numbers. We have to go back to the basics, Roop, and understand what a tariff is and who pays it. So ultimately, if you want to bring a good or something, a vehicle, a part, into this country, you have to pay the tariff. You are the importer of record, and you have to pay the tariff. You then have the opportunity to either absorb that, eat that cost, which you can do, or you can pass it on to the consumer. And so in the auto industry, we all know that the supply base really doesn't have a lot of room in their profit margins. They're extremely fragile right now. So they will pass on the tariff to the automaker, and the automaker in turn will pass it on to the consumer.
And the consumer are the very men and women who come to see Dan Casey in his office to say, hey, I'm having some money issues. I want to understand where I should invest, what I should do, what's next. What are you telling your clients right now about this really uncertain time when it comes to tariffs?
Yeah, so it's funny, too. I even had someone today in my office say that they were thinking of buying a car in the next year or two, but bought it sooner rather than later because of, you know, the tariffs. And then so tariffs are going to cause inflation. There's no way around it. Anytime that there's a shift of supply and demand, which is going to be when the tariffs come in, is when you usually get inflation. So I think that inflation is going to rear its ugly head again, and of course prices are going to go up. Now, I don't think necessarily, like Jan said, that 100% of it's going to fall on the consumer. You know, it's a lot of times the company themselves will eat a little bit. It's such a, as I've said before, tariffs don't happen in a vacuum. And some of those supplies that we have sent overseas to build a car and then bring it back, those won't be tariffs. So it's not like it's going to be a direct transfer.
In other words, it's not on the parts per se, but it's on the final car, the final product. And but some of these cars go other places to be made and then come back.
Right.
But I do want to talk about one thing I find interesting. When we think about foreign automakers, we automatically think Mazda, Honda, Kia, Hyundai. But what we need to realize is that so many American car companies build their cars other places. In fact, I believe the statistic goes something like 40% of General Motors vehicles are built elsewhere. Yet Ford Motor Company won't be hit as hard because more than 75% of their vehicles are built in America. Talk about how this will affect American automakers.
Yes, so 1 in 5 of the vehicles sold in the U.S. come from Canada and Mexico. And a big chunk of those are actually GM, Ford, Stellantis, and Volkswagen. So what's happening now with this new announcement with the 25% tariff, President Trump was not clear in the press conference yesterday, but as you know, Roop, the devil is in the detail. So the detail tells us that vehicles that are manufactured in what we know as previous NAFTA, USMCA, this trade agreement that we have between Canada, Mexico, and the US, those vehicles that are manufactured in Mexico or Canada, the percentage of parts in those vehicles that do not come from the U.S. will be subject to the tariff. So it gets complicated.
So I think that's why Dan was saying it's a little complicated. It's not in a vacuum. For instance, Tesla, Elon Musk's very company, yes, it's an American company that's built, the car is in America. However, there are parts that come from elsewhere.
Yes.
And because of that, the price of Teslas may even go up because of this.
But most of it is, he makes them here. And
the cars are made here, yes.
Which is why their stock went up. Same with Rivian. They build everything here and sell things here. And why all the U.S. automakers dropped. And GM even more so because the majority of GM's cars come from Canada and Mexico.
It is interesting to see people like Sean Fain, who has never been a fan of President Donald Trump, come out and praise President Trump, saying you finally got it right when it comes to fair trade. Has it been inequitable in the past? And perhaps that's even something that someone can argue. It has been, right? But is this the way to correct it, Jen?
It is one way to correct it. It is not the way to correct it in the auto industry. Look, we're all Michiganders here. We all want to see Michigan do well. We want strong manufacturing in the U.S. Of course we do. And when you hear at the top level, when Trump says we're going to put tariffs on products that come from other countries so that will incentivize people to build more plants in the U.S. and therefore there will be more jobs. Okay, I mean, that sort of makes sense at a very high level.
Long term.
Long term. Yeah. But when you really start to peel it back and understand the complexities of the automotive industry, you know that we have these global supply chains that we've spent decades building and crafting. And you have to understand the reasons why we decided to put product in these other countries. There are 3 primary reasons. Cost. Sure. Number 1, right? So we went to Mexico, we went to low-cost countries because of the cost. You bring that back to the U.S., you're going to pay a higher price. Capacity. We didn't have the capacity in the U.S. We couldn't make them here. And then finally, the technology. Mm-hmm. There are some products that we just simply cannot and do not make here. Electronics would be a classic example.
We've talked about chips in the past. Of course, we know what happened during COVID with the chip manufacturing. Final question, Dan, to you I want to ask is consumer confidence. This is a president who took pride in the economy. He left Mr. Biden, the president, when he left office. He promised during the election that inflation would go down and that the price of eggs and gas will go down. What does this do to that promise?
So a lot of that's come true. I mean, I don't know if you recently looked at the price of eggs, but they've come down substantially. Yeah. So, and oil has pretty much stayed the same, gone down a little bit, which affects obviously fuel prices. So, and inflation has come, it ticked up a little bit in February, but it has come down. Again, pricing has not so much come down, it's compounded, but inflation rate, it's not inflation price, it's inflation rate. So future prices, it should come down. But I guess I can just say bottom line, it's better now than it was. And
that's the bottom line, that the reason 70+ million people voted for this president, they wanted a better economy. It'll be interesting to see what happens with these tariffs as we move forward.
We're getting there.
Yeah, and we'll see as we move forward how that will look. It is so good to see you both. We thank you for your time here on The Pulse tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
And please come back again. Well, still ahead tonight, massive cuts coming to the Department of Health and Human Services. How much the agency is downsizing and the concerns Metro Detroit health organizations have. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. Thanks for making The Pulse your choice for political news. Let's face it, there's never a shortage of political news happening in our country. So let's get you up to date on some of the other big stories we're following at this hour, starting with an about-face by the Social Security Administration on a pretty controversial plan. You remember this? The agency planned to require everyone getting benefits to verify who they are in person if they couldn't do so online. Well, now the agency says people applying for disability insurance, Medicare, or supplemental income can actually complete the process on the phone, which is great news. But other Social Security applicants will need to go in person if they can't do it online. The changes are effective on April 14th. The original plan got a lot of pushback, with advocates say they could cause many people to not get the help that they need if they can't get to a physical office. Well, now to this story. President Donald Trump pulling one of his key allies' nominations for U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Her confirmation's been stalled for months, but in a Truth Social post, the president cited the slim majority the GOP has in the House, saying it's really important to maintain every Republican seat. He hasn't said who will replace her. UN ambassador is the last empty cabinet seat right now. Now let's take you out to Capitol Hill, where House Republicans are targeting public broadcasting, PBS. They want to cut off funding to PBS and NPR, claiming their news programming leans far too left and they're unfair. But efforts to cut or eliminate funding usually don't go anywhere because lawmakers want to protect their local stations. The broadcasters get roughly $500 million in public money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But Big Bird is on alert. Now to a major overhaul at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced the department will actually end up laying off thousands of workers, including ones that oversee billions of dollars in key services. So here's what we need to know, and here's what the agency's current workforce is at right now: 82,000 workers. Kennedy says that workforce will be slashed down to 62,000, cutting 20,000 people out. Now 10,000 will be laid off. The other 10,000 will be given early retirement or buyouts encouraged by the Trump administration. Some of those workers being cut oversee billions of dollars of funding to addiction services and community health centers across the country and here in Michigan. Kennedy blamed the current staff for America's health declining, saying they'll do more with less. But health organizations in Metro Detroit are a bit concerned.
People that are receiving services right now that are getting help for addiction. They're in programs. They come to programs because they need help.
That's a challenging time at the Health and Human Services Department. We can tell you that right now. In fact, there have been rumors about mass firings for weeks. And then you'll remember $11 billion in public health funding's been revoked, and the agency's been criticized for its response to a measles outbreak as well. So much going on. That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. As always, we'll see you back here tomorrow night. I'm Roop Raj. Have a good night.